Obviously, viewing the right to drugs as a species of property right presupposes a capitalist conception of the relationship between the individual and the state, incompatible with the socialist conception of that relationship. We are familiar with the fact that capitalism is premised on the right to property. As for socialism, Webster defines it as a system or condition of society or group living in which there is no private property. Drug censorship, like book censorship, is an attack on capitalism and freedom. Psychiatrists either ignore this cardinal connection between the chemicals we call drugs and politics, preferring to treat drug use as if it were purely an issue of mental health or psychopathology. Or, if they recognize it, treat the relationship with their customary hostility to liberty and property. To illustrate this point, I shall juxtapose the views on liberty and property of two of the most important thinkers of our age, Ludwig von Mises and Sigmund Freud. Although both men lived in Vienna at about the same time and addressed some of the same momentous issues, I have never seen their differing judgments come up and brought to bear on our current views concerning drug controls. Ludwig von Mises versus Sigmund Freud in 1922. Ludwig von Mises, the most unappreciated genius of our century, published a book entitled Socialism, establishing his reputation, at least among the cognoscenti. His closing sentences in that work read thus: whether society is good or bad may be a matter of individual judgment, but whoever prefers life to death, happiness to suffering, well-being to misery, must accept, without limitation or reserve, private ownership of the means of production. 7 years later, Sigmund Freud, the most successful charlatan of our century, published Civilization and its Discontents, adding more luster to his already considerable fame, especially among scientifically minded enemies of capitalism and freedom. I have no concern, declared Freud, with any economic criticism of the communist system. I cannot inquire into whether the abolition of private property is expeditious or advantageous. Freud's anti-capitalist remarks were not isolated comments, tossed off at the spur of the moment. Years before, he greeted the Bolsheviks' declaration of war on private property and religious freedom with a mixture of naivete and optimism. At a time when the great nations announced that they expect salvation only from the maintenance of Christian piety, he wrote in 1917, "The revolution in Russia, in spite of all its disagreeable details, seems none the less like the message of a better future." In public, Freud chided the United States for not sharing his disdain for religion. In private, he conducted his business in US dollars only. Unfortunately, modern liberals continue to focus on human rights rather than on property rights. Why? Because it makes them appear socially concerned, caring and compassionate. By splitting off property rights from human rights, liberals have succeeded in giving the former a bad name, undermining the moral legitimacy of all other rights in the process. But property rights are not only just as valid as human rights, they are anterior to, and necessary for, human rights.